We got some news coming on one of the top stories that we've been following here, and that is the investigation or the raid on the home of President Zelensky's chief of staff. Nick Paton-Walsh here with more. Nick, what have you been learning in the last few minutes?
Well, it is certainly, I think, a seismic piece of political news for the embattled administration of President Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, hours after his top chief of staff, his top negotiator, Andrei Yermak's home and office was raided by anti-corruption negotiators. I should point out they didn't immediately emerge and say that they'd found anything, and they apparently acted without impediment. But Andrei Yermak, the second most powerful politician in that government, has submitted his resignation. This has happened in just the last minutes, but Volodymyr Zelensky himself has said, "I want no one to have any questions about Ukraine today. We have the following internal decisions. First, there will be a reboot of the office of the President of Ukraine. The head of the office, Andrei Yermak, has written a letter of resignation." Now, I should point out that over the last 3.5 years, there's been quite a churn inside Kiev's cabinet, Zelensky's cabinet. Many top officials in many roles have changed. There's been a lot of cabinet reshuffles, but the departure of Yermak, with the timing so closely associated with this raid, is clearly a reflection of the pressure that Zelensky has found himself under. We've heard from European allies consistently sounding the need for caution when it comes to corruption. This is becoming, I think, a distraction from the message Zelensky is trying to put out about unity around whatever demands diplomatically will be made of Ukraine. And of course, it's very complex for Ukraine in a moment like this to have its peace negotiations led by a man who's had investigators in his own home a matter of hours later. So a moment, I think, of extraordinary complexity for President Zelensky here. Clearly, the decision has been made that they need to try and turn the page, that whatever comes now in this corruption investigation must be distanced from the Zelensky administration. But ultimately, too, this, some argues, potentially puts President Zelensky closer into the firing line. There's no buffer between him and the outside world now, were the investigation to expand in any way further at all. And clearly, Zelensky felt or Yermak felt the need to act here, and that's something his opponents and certainly Moscow will seize upon, Becky.
Yeah, and that's what we've got to talk about. Where does this leave talks, the prospect for peace at this point? We've got a US drafted plan doing the rounds. What's your sense, Nick?
Look, the entirety of the negotiation team was not just Andrei Yermak. He led it, but there was Rustem Umerov. There are plenty of others who can continue the work. So I think it's important not to overemphasize quite what this does to Ukraine's negotiating strategy, the ultimate decisions of which will be made by Zelensky anyway. But you do have a credibility issue when you have a change of key negotiator this deep into this kind of process. It is certainly something the Russians will seize upon. They've already been pointing towards the legitimacy of the Ukrainian government, saying, Putin, that they cannot sign agreements with Russia because they haven't had elections recently. They will pick upon this too. Let me add into this as well. I am grateful to, as his words of President Zelensky, I'm grateful to Andrei for always representing Ukraine's position in the negotiation track exactly as it should be. It has always been a patriotic position, but I want there to be no rumours or speculation. As for now, the new head of the office tomorrow, I will hold consultations with those who could lead this institution. So swiftly moving to try and replace Yermak there. But as we're just saying, we are in the days ahead going to see a new set of negotiation rounds between the Americans and the Ukrainians, in which I think it's fair to say most analysts anticipate the Trump administration will say, the deal we're currently offering to the Russians looks likely it's not going to be accepted by Vladimir Putin, judging by his remarks just yesterday, and potentially pressure Kiev to concede more, possibly some kind of territory. The change in their casting, their staffing of this negotiating team will be key in terms of how credibly Ukraine's able to hold that particular pressure off. And then, of course, separately, early next week, we have Steve Witkoff, President Trump's envoy to this particular conflict. going to Moscow to potentially lay out the proposal which was put together by the US and Ukraine. We know pretty much already that Vladimir Putin's going to reject it. He said yesterday he wants the land that he says Ukraine is holding. He means basically the rest of Donbass, as far as we know from what seems to be percolating from these discussions, or he says he'll take it militarily. So this Moscow visit by Witkoff didn't seem to have particularly positive prospects, but I think now we will see further pressure placed upon Kiev because of this wound now they've had to suffer. Possibly Yermak moving on to remove distractions from what Zelensky's been trying to achieve, or possibly because more was to emerge. We simply don't know. But I think this is the first time we've seen this corruption scandal, the damage it's done to Zelensky domestically, hard, I think, to overstate. You know, he was roughly impregnable, some might say, to all the travails of war, the demands made on the Ukrainian population to give their men up to the front lines and their women as well. But this corruption scandal hit at the heart of an issue so close to so many Ukrainians, not just corruption and how it's blighted Ukrainian society for decades, but energy. That's where the kickbacks were paid in the sector of, and energy blackouts are something that's blighting Ukrainians now because of the Russian onslaught. So a deeply problematic moment here for President Zelensky, and clearly here a move that I think they hope will draw a line under it. Does it instead add fuel to the fire? We'll have to see in the days ahead, but it's not going to make these negotiations any easier.
Ambassador, always good to talk to you. So, as Nick was just noting, Andriy Yermak was the man leading Ukraine's negotiations here. So how does this complicate these negotiations now?
Well, Erica, we will see. Nick's right. We will see over the next month or so. But Andriy Yermak was a controversial person. He was controversial domestically in Ukraine. He was controversial internationally among observers. So this may, in some sense, help Zelensky move forward on this. As Nick points out, Zelensky wants to draw a line under this investigation. He has fired a couple of ministers, and now he's accepted the resignation of another person apparently implicated. So Zelensky is trying to put that behind him. No one has accused Zelensky of any of those kinds of problems. And as I say, Yermak had his own set of detractors.
So when we look at where things stand then, sort of with the big unknown over the developments just earlier today, Yermak had told The Atlantic Ukraine would never cede territory to Russia as part of a peace deal, saying, quote, not a single sane person today would sign a document to give up territory. This has always been an understandable contention in any of these negotiations. Of course, that 28-point plan had Ukraine ceding territory that Russia didn't even occupy, which of course was a non-starter. How much of the focus, right, or how high on the list, I should say, is this idea of territory at this point as Ukraine moves forward to try to get something done?
Very high, Erica, very high. It's right up there, the top couple of issues. And Yermak is right, and Zelensky has made the same exact point. That is, Ukrainians are not going to give up legal claim to all of their territory, all of the 1991 borders. They will acknowledge, Erica, they will acknowledge that the Russians occupy, what you're showing there, that shown in red is 19% of Ukraine's territory is occupied right now. That's a fact by the Russians. That's a fact. They will acknowledge that fact. They will not give up claim. They will not acknowledge that the Russians own that, nor should anyone else, nor should the Americans, nor should the Europeans, and the Ukrainians will never give up claim to that territory.
There has been an ongoing discussion for some time now about what it is that would actually get Moscow to budge a little bit, to concede something, because the concessions have largely come or been asked of the Ukrainians at this point. There is, depending on who you talk to, some evidence that sanctions may be having an impact. But I was speaking earlier with Colonel Cedric Leighton, who said he really felt it was only the presence of troops, maybe NATO troops, that would really push Russia in that direction. Do you agree?
I do agree. I think there are military things to be done and economic things to be done to put pressure on Putin to realize, to acknowledge that he can't win on the ground. But the military, I mean, Colonel Leighton is exactly right. It has to be a military. It's long-range weapons. It's Tomahawk missiles from the United States. It's probably European troops on the ground in Ukraine to be sure that the Russians don't attack again. And then it is also important to put those sanctions on, to squeeze the revenues going into the Russian economy.
We are out of time, but just a yes or no if you can. Do you think we are getting closer to a place where there could be a deal?
I do. I think it's because the Europeans and the Ukrainians and the Americans are now agreed on the 19-point plan, not the 28-point plan that the Russians wrote and like, but on the 19-point plan, there's unanimity.
All right, we'll be watching for it. Ambassador, always good to talk to you. Thank you.